Right, so thank you for coming over here. I'm going to talk about what it means to have the C word in the national security agenda. So for those who have no idea what I meant about the C word, I do mean cyber or cybersecurity, not the other four-letter C word. It is a wordplay though. I know a lot of people in this room, for the past couple of years, you really hate the word cyber. But I kind of get used to it and get over it. And now, now I've been saying it a lot, especially in this talk as well. The motivation of this talk at the end is like not, that you guys will not just hate the word cyber, but the word security as well. So hopefully, get the objective right. So just a little bit about myself. I started as a researcher looking into incident handling, looking into tools for incident detection, interception. Then I moved on to work in the Security Ops Center with the military in the defense industry. After that, I moved on to a bit of the soft side of security, which looks into policy, standards, guidelines, regulation, and stuff like that. And on top of that, my day-to-day job, I'm very involved in the community as well, with Edge's now HoneyNet project and things like that. So I'd like to begin with my talk with one of my favorite quotes, which also, it's very relevant for this topic, which is what Ronald Reagan said in one of the President's News Conference. He says, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So for those who know where I'm working at, just a big disclaimer, I'm representing myself only, not my company, nothing. This research is something I did a couple of years ago during my free time. So this presentation looks into the emergence and development of cybersecurity from the context of political science, communication science, and so on and so forth. But I must say I'm not a political scientist, not a geographer, linguist, or anything. My former training is still very technical based in computer science as well as information security. So all this knowledge and things like that mainly come from conversation with lots of my uni mates from various disciplines in pubs and coffee shops and cafes, and lots of independent reading. Right, so over the last few years, we realized that our dictionaries has expanded tremendously to include a lot of new words, a lot of new vocabularies to broach the technical subject that we all worked on. I like to survey lots of my friends, especially those who have been around in the industry for a very long time. What do they think it meant, and why do they think that this happened? And most of them thinks or says that it is just a fashion, it's just a fashion, it's just a choice. However, it is not. For those of you who work in policy, I'm sure you guys know, or you should know, the differences between all these words. But unfortunately, this talk is not really about these words specifically. So all these words has found their way into many countries' national security agenda over the past few years through various strategic documents, and has been introduced by politicians, states representatives, and has been really, really well received by general public. These strategic documents, interestingly, they outline the national approach to cybersecurity, as well as how cyber threats will be dealt with at the national level. The interesting thing is that more than 40 other countries have strategic documents like this, but however, they are rather different. That's the interesting part, because at the end, we all know that we somehow rather face more or less the same threats or in the same situation, but yet we are all approaching it very differently. So my talk, the next couple of minutes, the aim of it is to explore and explain this phenomenon and seek out the principal notion, the very principal notion from a policy angle, on how cybersecurity become a national security issue, and what impact it has on the future. So in order to do that, like I say, it's not about all those fancy words, cyber, information, electronic, or anything, but the very fundamental of the word security. So in order for us to understand all this, we need to establish the very fundamental principle and theory of how threats come into existence and become a national security agenda. So the Oxford Dictionary defines security as a state of being free from danger or threat. It is really easily relatable to our day-to-day feelings of being safe and unthreatened. However, it can be really challenging to interpret this definition in the context of national security or national policy and governance. So historically, the notion of national security has been heavily associated with sovereignty and understood in military terms. But recently, the well-being of a country has been recognized to be dependent on many, many other things, such as the economy, as well as the social vitality of the nation. The concept then is the concept of national security was then looked into very extensively during the Cold War, and especially so after the fall of the Berlin Wall. There were like specific motions just to broaden the national security agenda from just a very strict focus on sovereignty into the security of people. So lots of people comes in and say like, you know, we're going to start looking into the new way to look into national security and start to broach in lots of new topics. And the consequences of that is many subjects were being proposed, and security essentially became a synonym for everything that is good and desirable. Anything just keep dropping into all these conversations. So I'm going to show you a little clip on.
Our nation's security has never been stronger because our troops and our veterans are this nation's backbone. Because farmers are this nation's backbone, schools is this nation's backbone. Audio installation specialists and window tinters are this nation's backbone. Because Filipino tilt-a-whirl operators are this nation's backbone.
So yeah, essentially everything is nation backbone. I really like how that guy was so driven at the side. Yeah. So that's it. I mean, when everything is a national security issue, nothing really is. So then lots of people got really concerned about how this development is going. And those people who have been looking into security agenda have agreed that we need to firmly address the first thing, which is the concept of security. What exactly is security, and what constitute a threat to national security? So one of the famous academic, Roland Lipschutz, he proposed that we engage by asking 3 questions. The first question is, what is it of being secure? What is it that is being secure? The second is, what is the condition? And the third, the development of it. The first 2 questions were either too ambiguous or too difficult to determine, or even impossible to comprehend or appraise. But the last question, however, which seeks to understand how security agendas are developed, has been seen as the key to explain the concept of security, the notion, the principle of security. So this development, this process of security, of an issue become a security topic, this process is termed as securitization. So securitization is essentially just the emergence of a national security agenda. The need for securitizing a problem that arises when there is an emergency situation that requires legitimizing whatever means necessary to neutralize the existence or the development of a threat. And some of the initial papers that was out was saying that people securitize things because of various reasons, such as to raise an issue of a problem, for deterrence, for control, and all sorts of reasons like that. So it is natural then we assume that the seriousness of a threat perceived by the government is directly reflected on the national security policy, but study shows that that such correlation wasn't found at all. A pattern, however, emerged that the formation of the security agenda depends on how the threat was articulated, how is it being said, how is it being brought across through written words or verbal words. So this renders the whole process of securitization as a speech act. And the protocol prescribed that there are 3 types of action that will be induced from this process, which is the act of saying or wanting to say something, the actual act of saying, and the third one, which is the most interesting one, that is the perception or the receiving end, the receiving end of the audience. So this last bullet point is quite important because it kind of explains, the principle states that security is not just the utterance of the word security. The whole process involves the elements of the audience and the acceptance of the speech by the actor who attempts to speak security into existence, not too much about, something's happened. So this is a whole new notion of security. So the formal definition of securitization, this is one of the most de facto book people look into for this subject. It's written by the Copenhagen School. So they define that securitization is a designation of existing threat requiring emergency action, special measure, and acceptance of a significant audience. And a lot more years later, another great academia came out and expanded this definition and says that securitization is articulation of practice using heuristic artifacts, where they contextualize, mobilize, which is using heuristic artifacts contextually mobilized by securitizing actors and audience to build a coherent network of implications, and thus encourage that a customized policy must be undertaken immediately to block the development of threats. So, but one thing to note that as we go along is securitization is not a linear transformation from one stage to another. There's no one act itself. It's not like you can identify this happen and that. It's not one act after another, but it's a much more complex process than that. So in order to explain the complex model of securitization, many security scholars have incorporated linguistic and cognitive study on something we call the frame research, a broader frame looking into security or threat utterance. So the act of framing is essentially just a verbal expression of thoughts made up from compounds of the uttering actor, his perception and his interpretation, and convincing the audience to accept based on what the audience knows about the world. And this is an interesting part because fundamentally, as studies shown that the worldview of a man is just a pseudo-environment. We don't really perceive what the world is, but how we interpret it. It's a very geopolitical kind of theory, kind of term, which I can get into, but that will take another half an hour-ish. So this makes the whole, looking into frames makes it very interesting because then from an analyst angle, it's easy for us, or it makes it a lot easier for us to understand this complex model of securitization, looking into big frames, not just for analysts, but also for people who are trying to securitize something. Someone who's trying to speak security into existence, that they can strategize it accordingly. So then, there's a big part of the acceptance bit, which then relies a lot on what the audience know about the world. So when it comes to framing, if you want to have a really high success rate, the best is the securitizing actor present it in a way that stirs the emotion of the audience to accept what their interpretation, how they perceive it, and also even better, which is to align to their worldview. So this is another clip from one of my favorite series, Yes, Minister.
Well, the party have had an opinion poll done. It seems all the voters are in favour of bringing back national service.
Well, I have another opinion poll done showing the voters are against bringing back national service.
We can't be for it and
Oh, of
against.
course they can, Bernard. Have you ever been surveyed? I was asking you some questions. Mr. Woolley, Are you worried about the number of young people without jobs?
Yes.
Are you worried about the rise in crime among teenagers?
Yes.
Do you think there's a lack of discipline in our comprehensive schools?
Yes.
Do you think young people welcome some authority and leadership in their lives?
Yes.
Do you think they respond to a challenge?
Yes.
Would you be in favour of reintroducing national service?
Yes. Oh, well, I suppose I might.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the danger of war?
Yes.
Are you worried about the growth of armaments?
Yes.
Do you think there's a danger in giving young people guns and teaching them how to kill?
Yes.
Do you think it's wrong to force people to take up arms against their will?
Yes.
Would you oppose the reintroduction of national service?
Yes.
It's framing.
Well,
So, just a few more additional properties talking about securitization. Security is more like we call it a self-reference practice, which is a threat does not become a security problem unless it is a security problem. It's a bit deep there, but the other one is more interesting one is a sustainable strategic practice, which is a security problem has to be continuously securitized. If not, it will kind of be forgotten. So you have to always be re-emphasize, reframe that it is an emergency problem that we must be dealt with a high level of grade status. It must be at that level. If not, it will no longer be a security problem or not be in the national security agenda anymore. So the next few slides, I'm going to look into how the cyberspace was securitized. I'm going to pick US for this examination. The reason of I selecting the states is because they are one of the pioneers of the information age. And it was one of the first countries that associated cyber threats with its politics and international relations. And historically, based on the historic development, is also a good succinct representation to the rest of the world in this topic. So, although most of the policy, most of the development debates comes around in the 90s, but it's a phenomenon that does not only emerge in the 90s. It started all the way in the 80s, where there was a wide discussions on the possible impacts a malicious actor can do or can cause by exploiting insecure computer system and networks. First, of course, we have war games, which released in 1983, which famously portrayed how a teenager who broke into a military computer could single-handedly start a nuclear war. Whoa. Sorry. So in the same summer, a group of youth known as the 414s, they were arrested by the FBI for breaking into lots of computers across the States and Canada. So this incident was demonstrated that anyone with a computer can have the capacity to break into financial corporation, medical clinics, hospital, and military bases. So, and all these two brilliant case study was talked about a lot, and the reviews and critics of the movie was not confined just to the visual art columns, but it was also critically assessed and discussed widely or explicitly in Pentagon as well as Congress. So threat image being projected by these incidents was used explicitly, like I say, by the representative in Congress as a catalyst to support the need for new legislation statute as well as national policy direction. So Ronald Reagan, he was really concerned of cybersecurity, especially after some of this incident. He issued the National Security Directive, the NSDD 145. On this document, he introduced a wider destructive range of threat actors. It's not just the rebellious teenagers that you have seen in the past two case study. It's not just computer specialists like some of us who have the intelligence trail to to break into sensitive computer system. He expanded it to include actors, or explicitly says that they are to include foreign nations, terrorist groups, and criminals into these overall threat frames. Think about it, that is in the 80s, so that's during the Cold War period. Then the Congress passed the Counterfeit Access Device and the CFAA, which, interestingly, it was unseemingly really narrow, focusing on just government and financial sector. You can kind of start to relate how threat frames can start to affect policy. And it placed a huge emphasis on just computer and information system that belongs to government, military defense, foreign relations, and the relationship between financial institutions. So you can start to see, the relations here. And the most interesting one is they expanded their jurisdiction that Secret Service can now start to conduct investigation related to computer crime. And it was this move was really highly criticized, that the states starts to misconceptualize crime and national security. Then, of course, we have the Morris worm outbreak. So among thousands of computers was being shut down, those includes computers from Department of Energy, National Aeronautic and Space Administrations, many great universities like MIT, Purdue, and Cornell. So the whole Morris incident kind of raised a certain level of concern about among the government officials that a single malware has brought down a large scale of computer networks, and all this consisting of many significant computers as well, to a standstill. So then the GAO, the General Accounting Office, or Audit Office, Accounting Office, was tasked to look into and report on the state of the internet. Interestingly, the report that came out says that there's a lack of focal point in addressing internet-wide security issues. And lastly, in the 1989, Clifford Stowe, assistant admin of Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, published a real-life example of cyber or international espionage episode with his computer labs. So all these things happen all at once or over that one decade, and it seems like threat actors, it affirmed that threat actors are no longer just confined to youths and computer specialists. These incidents led the government officials to start to question how damaging cyber threats can be, and it makes the whole NSDD fear of foreign exploitation very real. So the thing is, each of these occurrences open a small little window, open a slight window in demonstrating the disturbance of what cyber threats could cause, but they could only justify overall government reform, a policy reform, but not a declaration of emergency status. So before we move on, I just want to touch a bit about the proximity of threat, which links heavily to the acceptance of the audience. So the thing about threat framing is that no matter how extensively an issue can be covered over and over again by public representatives, state figures, and the news media, if it does not ignite the audience of accepting, it does not ignite the audience a sense of danger, they will not perceive the threats to be close proximity to them. So sometimes just like, it's not really within my wouldn't damage me or wouldn't harm me. So to do that, what people do is to solve it or to make it a security problem to everyone or to the audience is to expand this threat frame, expand it out. The shift and the threat frames had to include the society as a whole, a shared culture, which would have greater impact on the principles and the emotions of the audience. So this is exactly what two reports later on that the National Research Council came out with that stirred this overall expanded threat frame. So in contrast to the previous case that just prompted the government or the military to do a certain level of reform. This report extended the whole cyber threat frame to include the society as a whole. So one of the reports started off saying that we are at risk. America depends on computers, not the military, not the government, not the banks, not the financial institute. America, the entire country. They are vulnerable, and they are compared with danger of gun and bomb. And tomorrow terrorists can do more damage with a keyboard than a bomb. Computer just got compared to, or keyboard compared to a gun and a bomb, and the entire America is vulnerable to that keyboard. What's going on? So the whole securitizing of the cyberspace developed in a much faster pace during Clinton's administration. So during the cybersecurity was a constant residence in his national security strategy, his NSS, which he laid down 3 primary objectives for his NSS, or the security strategy of the states, which is to enhance the security, to improve the prosperity through a sound economy, and to promote democracy. Throughout his administration, he published 3 very important documents, and all of them links that cybersecurity links to the overall objective of the security of the country. And study shows that, if you look into all these documents closely, they are all very closely tied with one thing, which is infrastructure, the national infrastructure. So this infrastructure that was being said, they are qualified as critical infrastructure, such that any of their unavailability, any of the disturbance will cause a huge social instability, economic crisis, and so on and so forth. It's just throw in as many words that can damage as many people as possible. And interestingly, the metaphors, earlier I was saying securitization relies heavily on what we call the heuristic artifacts. This is one of them. So metaphors such as lifeline, nervous systems, backbones, essential artilleries, organic essential. So all this, they use all this choice of word. Like what Ken Brady in the campaign was like, everything is a backbone and everything. And this works very well because all this that's being listed are the crucial parts of a human anatomy, and articulates the very importance of the overall well-being of the country. So the semantics of critical infrastructure, CI, was popularized in the aftermath of Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. So right after that, there was a directive to review the vulnerability of government facilities and their critical infrastructure to terrorism. The most interesting part about this report is the person who looks into it went beyond terrorism and says that we should not just, all these threats that's happening, we should not just look into terrorist threats, and also not just physical threats, but into cyber threats as well on all this infrastructure. During that period of time, people just like to, all this policy just keep expanding and expanding threat frames. And this is one of the great example. So it's not only this, but that, and this, and that. It's like, why are you trying to secure? So right after the report, President Clinton, he established the PCCIP, which is a long name, the Commissions on Critical Information Protection. So the mission of it is to look into how to secure the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure of in America. So if you look at some of the reports that was right after the year of the formation, they published a report, and the structure of the report just proved the entire intention to securitize the country's protection of critical infrastructure. So you can see some of them that I've quoted, that infrastructure underpins every aspect of our life and so on and so forth. I won't go too much into it. And then the most interesting one is there was huge occurrence of they keep talking about information age, cyber dimensions, cyber vulnerabilities. So although the aim of the infrastructure protection, the PCCIP, was to protect the critical infrastructure, but they start to put in cyber stuff in there as well. So after that, there was even further enforcement of threat frames in more precedent directive, the Directive 62 and 63. And on all these directives, President Clinton called for even more reviews on how to defend the American cyberspace. So this is one of the three important documents I mentioned earlier, and is seen as, in our field, is seen as one of the first publication of national cybersecurity strategy, or it's like, yeah. So in essence, we can see like over the years, cyber threat was securitized during Clinton administration by leveraging on highly regarded status of critical infrastructure and to push into the national security agenda. And of course, we have Bush administration. Initially, it was quite interesting because when he took office, his first national security presidential directive, the NSPD, he removed most of the terms that Clinton used, such as cybersecurity, cyber vulnerabilities. All these were never mentioned in his first NSPD. He abolished the Critical Infrastructure Group and parked it under the National Security Council Policy Coordination Committee on Counterterrorism and National Preparedness. That's a long name. The thing is, Bush wasn't, it's not that he doesn't value security as much, but he has a totally different stance, which is during his presidency, he was very fixated about his doctrine on prevention and preemptive measures against threats. So he always wanted to be one step ahead, which got him quite a lot of troubles in the kinetic warfare bit with UN and NATO. Then he has the NSPD 16, which was classified at the time when I was still doing my research. It was actually the first document in history that pushed down an order to develop cyber weapons, and also guidance on how to use or when to use this weapon. Later on, he published another strategic document that kind of revived. He talked a bit about cybersecurity stuff again. He kind of revived what he missed out the first time, which is what Clinton talked about on critical infrastructure. But there's something very interesting among the hidden language, or among the language in it, is he has an imminent offensive nature behind his strategy on cybersecurity. Under the security, he actually states that US reserve the right to resort to force in response to actual or potential cyber attacks on the country's cyberspace. So essentially, if you hack us, if you attack us, we'll bomb you. Or if we think that you will hack us, we'll bomb you as well. So during his time, in order to present this technical subject as a national security problem, cybersecurity was identified as a topic of terrorism and warfare. The thing is, such threat rhetoric it discounts many other areas of national concern, such as economy, markets, and law enforcement aspect of cybersecurity, and so on and so forth. So all these case studies is like, they just write on different things, different current threat frames to push out another, like a naughty child of what's, or a rebellion child, cybersecurity, an unknown one, just keep pushing it through with existing existing threat to the country. So as we've seen, like I say, in the past 2 decades, since information system was depicted in the box office, the frame has expanded tremendously. It evolved staggeringly to encompass. It initially started off as what is the security status of the internet. It started off as a technical design problem, and then it became associated to encompass the well-being of the society, the principal concept of freedom itself, which the states are quite fixated about. So through all this, the government officials kind of brought cyber threat a lot closer, lots more closer in proximity to the citizen and the entirety of civilization itself. So all this expansion of threats this term we usually coined it as the reframing of it. It can seem as a natural growth that they realize, like, the constant discovery of how dangerous society, cyber threat can be to the modern society. But there's another angle to it, which what I mentioned earlier. The reframing was induced by the interaction with many other threat frames. So during Clinton's time, I was talking about total national preparedness, critical infrastructure. Cybersecurity got interacted with it, and a policy got thrown out of it. Same as Bush time, during his doctrine of preemptive prevention, it got interacted with cybersecurity, and it pushed out to another. It got pushed out as a security from that point of view. So back to let's go a bit deeper into some of the heuristic artifacts that was used when it comes to securitization. So in the definition that it was heuristic artifacts were routinely utilized or to convince the audience that an emergent threat requires an immediate response and has to be tackled from a national security viewpoint, not just a policy, not just a reform one, but a security one. So for such artifacts, and such artifacts are usually found in the form of catchphrases or stories, mainly just because it's a lot easier for the audience to be related to if you use certain level and analogy. But the thing is, it's often discovered that all these analogies, all these heuristic artifacts have negative connotations to bring fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. Yeah. So one of a few common examples is analogy such as electronic Pearl Harbor, weapon of mass disruption, and cyber terrorism were introduced to broach the topic of cybersecurity in the context of national security. So these are some of the few examples. CIA compared cyber threats to weapon of mass destruction and say it's really close up there. And one of the representatives of Pennsylvania, he said that he compared cybersecurity or cyber threats to missiles and so on. And the other one is the senator of Utah. He described cyber threats as more or less like a nuclear device being set on in a major city. Just this annotation is just getting, it's a bit ridiculous. But the thing is, all these analogies are very successful. And the bad thing is, it kind of, the consequences of it is, if it got compared to all these things, the threat became it seems to everyone as unpredictable, unmanageable, and incomprehensible. So because all this language, all these words, all these things is being used, all these analogies, references being used, it seems like the whole cyberspace is depicted as such a complex system of technology that is getting out of hand, it is unmanageable. So, and worse off is this fear kind of sparks a whole level of anxiety and uncertainty over how this problem should be dealt with. It should be securitized. It should be dealt in an emergent situation. We need to legitimize everything to make sure all this development stops. But And the worst thing is, the study shows that general public bought it, they love it, they accept all these things. But however, it can, because of all this practice, it can actually feel very badly. So one of the evidence that Clinton, he made an amazing speech in Nebraska. He says that the biggest threats to the future is cyberterrorism, cybersecurity, and it's just people fooling around. So you can kind of see, like, after 20 decades, about 1 decade or 10, 20 years of conversation about cybersecurity, it didn't get anywhere. At the end, people just start talking about it's going to disrupt every piece of our life, our civilization, every single fragment of society, and how bad things are, how complicated things is. At the end, to him, it's just worse, and it's still the same old problem, going back to just people hacking. That's it. But what is it? What's the real problem? It's just 20 years of work just went to waste. So that's the danger, because of using like vague definition, inaccurate use of terminology and analogy could really hinder the understanding of relationship between the real threat and national security. And like I said, it just hinders the whole development of any meaningful solution or even discussion. So a general school of thought in lots of people's mind is the more secure you are, the better it is. Actually, it's not really. In the field of security studies, security are encouraged, or actually security are discouraged. Because the thing about security is you give excessive rights. You know, when there's a national security problem, you need to give excessive rights so they can neutralize it, you can curb it. And because of these excessive rights, it emboldens a less democratic solutions. It became a problem of the military, a problem of just the government. It's just like, that's a problem with security. It's a national security problem. It's us. We'll solve it. So essentially, it symbolizes the failure of managing the whole issue through normal politics or just normal procedure. So although the thing about securitization that people have the habit of doing it so much is to stabilize a certain threatening conflict or development, or just to raise the awareness. But many case studies have shown, not just in what I've been talking about the last couple of slides, but in many other fields as well, it has shown that it actually caused a lot more undesirable and counterproductive conversations and approach at the end of the day. Worse off, the words about security is like, in traditional, most of us, we know that there's no 100% security, but if you talk to the general public, it's a very normal perception that you're either secure or you're not. So because of that, we are always chasing the impossible. So the important thing now is, like, we need to put cybersecurity into perspective. And so far, as you have seen, like, all the case study I've been talking about, we just highlight the scary things about the cyberspace, and nothing was even we talk about social fragments being in danger and things like that because we rely on so much, but nothing on the benefits was talked about to protect those benefits or to maximize them. So cybersecurity, it requires a balance of security of the market, and the best thing that we all in our industry, we know that is through risk management, because the concept of risk kind of helps us to have an ongoing administration of how things is going and the maintenance of the bespoke, insecure environment as a whole. So there is a call for desecuritize the cyberspace or cyber threat from the national security agenda. by removing the emergent status to encourage a more realistic and conducive interpretation, conducive interpretation of the threatening of this threatening subject. So, one of the approach that is being encouraged to go on is to discuss under the discourse of strategy, like how is it going to be, how we deal with cyber threat. So commonly used, so what is a strategy? So strategy is a word that everyone loves to use it because it just makes everything sound better. Like, I have a strategy. It sounds a lot better than, yeah, I think I'm going to do A, B, C. So there's a lot of definition of strategy. A few things that I want to highlight is security is like, strategy is like security. It's quite an ambiguous word. But there's a few points that is very important with three things. First is you must know your vision and goals. You must know what you want to do. You must have your plan. And the third one is you must make sure you have the resources. If not, it's just a wish list. Just another short clip about
Here's the
IT.
plan.
A plan. Let me put on my slightly larger glasses.
Okay, we go in.
When?
You know, like in a minute.
Will that be enough time for me to get to know the plan?
Yeah, you know what? I shouldn't have used the word plan. I've clearly gotten you overexcited.
Would scheme be a better word? Although that's just as exciting. I might even need these.
All I was going to say was, we go in, I make up a load of bollocks about computers, and we'll see if she picks up on it.
Yes, I can see why you didn't want to use the word plan.
Yeah. Right, so 2011, the UK published the NCSS. It was actually quite a good document. It lays out the vision, the objectives, everything. You have very good pillars of objectives, and you have to be honest, it's one of the best NCSS I've read. Even goes all the way down to the specific action items to establish each of these objectives, and it was evaluated every year to see whether the strategy is in place that is going to the right direction. But still, if you look at it, there's one line that says, I should have highlighted it. There. The second one, to protect our interest in cyberspace. Although it appears that the UK adopted a strategy approach, looking into cybercrime and economic growth and things like that, the interesting bit is if you look into the budget, they put a lot of resources into this strategy to increase the cybersecurity of the UK. But if you look at closely into the budget, more than half, about 60 to 65% of it, is actually put as classified. And it was actually allocated to two agencies, GCHQ and MOD. And also, like I say, there was a strikingly glaring things about interest of protecting the interests of cybersecurity. So similarly to this is quite a bit of danger because it can be a danger to it broaden the whole cyber threat frame again and become like a synonym of the whole nation is vulnerable. We need to protect the overall interest of it. Sorry. So on top of interest, when it comes to that interest, on top of like those practice that you want to curb or you want to solve through the vulnerability or of cybercrime or whatnot, vulnerability of critical infrastructure and things like that, there's also another interest point of view in the cyberspace, which is terrorist groups or criminals making use of cyberspace, and that is kind of like a bit of conflict in terms of what do you really mean by protecting the interests of the cyberspace. So the ISF, the Information Security Forum, they even highlight that that the government is increasingly very aggressive in surveillance programs to protect state interests of cyberspace in order to push all this surveillance legislation out. They use very interesting threat images again, such as depicting like there are terrorists, there are criminal gangs, there are pedophiles lurking around in the cyberspace. And a more interesting one is, and they're just, this is one of the case study to talk about, they want to remove, or there's another crypto war that's happening, that they want to, that the law enforcement or those criminals are getting away from law enforcement through encryption technology. So if you look at the objective earlier, actually one of the things to highlight is to secure cyberspace through the rule of law, and languages like this were being used like to really enforce that some of these criminals are getting away with, or on the flip side of security. So what's even worse is there was a removal of telling people to use encryption in some of the security advice. And one thing I really want to highlight is when government or when policies, when directions like this got pushed out, there's always a big contradiction of national security, because so one of the example, which is Snowden, when he reviewed the PRISM initiative, what happened is there was estimated loss of 22 to 35 billions of revenue in the States over 3 years. And there was even research that says that it can grow up to $118 billion because of not just the sudden decrease of people who left the market because they don't want to be monitored by the government, but also after they have to start thinking about, or you have to start thinking about the market growth of technology. People start leaving, the growth start to curb. The loss is not just that one-time loss, it's a long-term loss. So in pursuit of protecting national security, paradoxically, all these activities kind of start to damage other aspects of national interest as well, such as the economy, worse off their political status as well, because the other foreign countries start to like, why are you monitoring me? And their leadership in the World Conference in various different dialogues just starts to die down or start to do really lots and lots of damage. So one thing I want to point out is strategy is a lot more than just a plan as well. It's more than just a plan of achieving a set of objective. It is a pattern, a position, as a perspective. There's a lot of soft side on any of these initiatives that people goes into. There's a lot of things you have to start looking into them. And I can just start going on to a whole research thing again for the last 50 slides and just to start uncover lots and lots of pieces that initially just seems like a normal set of paper, but you have many diverse or many hidden consequences. So all these definitions conceptualize that strategy as a abstract, as a collective mindset, intention and behavior. So to really effectively strategize really requires a very strong vision and leadership. Although the NCSS, the UK NCSS, laid out a very good plan, but the overall government strategic discourse of cybersecurity has to be a lot more cohesive. So how a country should deal with it is a lot more than just saying this is a security problem, and this is just one strategy of doing it, but an overall governance of collective, of coherent direction from the government. So in conclusion, we have seen like how cybersecurity has evolved drastically, using various different threat frames from just a security point of view, or that it has been securitized and so on, and then looking into it from a very strategic point of view after they sort of desecuritize the problem of cybersecurity. And like I say, we have to move beyond that into an overall whole national governance point of view. So back to the question, like why, I said earlier in I think the first five, I think in the fifth slide or something, like 40 other countries are approaching it differently. Why are they so different? Because different countries just view it differently. The way they frame things, the way they look at things, the threat images they have, just to convince the audience, just to convince the people is just different. And strategy, like I say, is not just it's not just a wish list. It's your resources as well. That's why different countries have different resources. Strategy is different, and yeah. So one last thing is I would like to highlight is cybersecurity is not just a technical topic. As you have seen, I've been talking about I've been pulling information from all different disciplines. I can go on for ages on if I look into like geopolitics stuff as well, but I only got 15 minutes. So yeah, there's lots of stuff that we should look into. It's not just a technical subject. So with that, I want to end off with one final clip.
There was just something about watching those clueless members of Congress debate the bill, watching them insist they could regulate the internet and a bunch of nerds couldn't possibly stop them.
I am not a nerd. I'm just not enough of a nerd.
Maybe we ought to ask some nerds what this thing really does. Let's have a hearing, bring in the nerds.
Really? Nerds? You know, I think actually the word you're looking for is experts. To enlighten you so your laws don't backfire, break the internet.
So yeah, we are the experts.